This week's Torah portion, Parashat Shmini, features spontaneous combustion. But first, I'd like to talk about traffic. I don't know if you've noticed, but this is the season when every road has to be torn up in this area. And so every major route to anywhere you could ever possibly want to go is blocked in like one lane. And you might also have noticed sometimes this leads to shortened tempers among our friends who join us on the road. Never us, of course. But some people. So I was driving down traffic disaster number 402, Wynwood Road, just past the Whole Foods in Wynwood. And there's one lane in each direction. And this road's, 4 or 5 lanes across. And it's just like stopped dead for 3/4 of a mile. And I wanted to turn right at the light, major intersection. And I'm in my one lane. And as I'm getting close to the intersection, I notice there are actually 2 cars who've decided that to the right of us is another lane. And they're going to take it. So they're now officially deciding this is the right turn lane. I'm not in it. Well, so I have to take a second here without killing anyone or getting hit. Do I turn right from the middle to because I'm I think at least in the correct lane for doing this, but they're over there next to me. Do I wait for them to go by and then turn right? Do I just call it and find another way to go? And in the second and a half, I'm trying to figure this out. Guy behind me starts laying into his horn. And that just makes me want to drive slower. I admit I have at times a bit of an ornery streak. And so he's just honking, and I'm like, give me a break. We're all miserable. It smells like tar out there. Come on. So I decide, fine, I'm not going to get into an accident trying to go around this corner. I'll just continue down the road. So the guy is right on my tail because wherever he has to be is super important, and I'm not driving fast enough for him. I'm going the speed limit. And I happened to catch up to a school bus also driving the speed limit. And coincidentally, it happened that the school bus and I drove the speed limit the whole way while the guy's swerving back and forth trying to get around us, but I refused to go any faster or slower than the school bus because, dagnabbit, that guy shouldn't have honked at me. Now, let's just assume what I assumed, which is that, clearly, the guy's a jerk, and you shouldn't honk at me, and it wasn't my fault. Okay, so that's an easy one, right? Maybe, though, it's 2:45. I was actually on my way here to pick up my son from preschool. Maybe that guy was really late to pick up his kid from school. And he wasn't going, maybe he was going to Broomall also, or he was going somewhere else. He had far to go. And he's freaking out because we all know when our kids are not picked up in the exact place at the exact second that they expected you to, that is a disaster, and you're going to have to deal with that. And maybe actually he was just nervous and worried. He could be stressed out. It could be a tough week. Maybe he has also been driving in the ridiculous amount of constructions going on around here, and he's just tired of it too. Now, which story do I get to tell myself, right? I started with the first one, clearly. I was in a mood. But the second one's just as likely. I have no information about what happened. I didn't stop and roll down my window. Excuse me, what's going through your mind while you're laying on your horn? Okay, back to the spontaneous combustion. So, I'd like to tell you a story about this week's portion. Here's how it goes. Aaron, Moses' brother, he's the high priest of the Israelites. He has 2 sons. He has several sons, but 2 of his sons, Nadav and Avihu, decide that they are going to offer their own incense, not what God had prescribed according to the Torah. They do this. The fire that they light consumes them, hence spontaneous combustion. They're burned alive. And Moses says to Aaron, so this is a brother speaking to a brother about his nephews. I told you not to. I told them not to. And Aaron has nothing to say. And then God follows that little bit up with, don't drink when you go into the tent of meeting. That's the story. So those are kind of the bare facts of what happened. The rabbis have a couple of possible interpretations, right? Some very obvious things they can glean. First of all, they jump to the idea that because the scene is followed immediately by the injunction to never drink wine or booze before you go into the temple, very clearly they say, well, they must have been drunk, right? They came in an inappropriate way, unsuitable for holy worship. That could be one. Maybe it's the ultimate rebuttal to innovation in worship. Maybe they were two guys, they were like the first Reformed Jews, and they were like, we're going to do something a little different here. And God was like, no, we've always been doing it this way. Or at that point, we've been doing it this way for 10 years, and don't change it now. We got to have established a pattern of tradition. You're ruining it for me. I'm going to eat you alive. I actually really like that interpretation, even though I dislike it philosophically. I think it's kind of amusing. It seems so plain in the text that, like, you point to it. I wonder if anyone who objects to Reform worship, like, points out and goes, look, in Nadav and Abihu, that's you. I don't know. When they see everything that I do. I'll tell you about my concert in a little bit. And it could be a lesson that you could draw about unintended consequences. Maybe it's that Nadav and Abihu were doing the best that they could, but they messed up. And sometimes the consequences of our actions are vastly out of proportion for what the crime might be. And that's just kind of the nature of the world. Sometimes things happen and you didn't have a say in the matter and it's unfair. Maybe it's a lesson about Murphy's Law, which says, of course, that if something is going to go wrong, then the one that causes the greatest amount of catastrophe is the most likely. Also could be it. So let's explore this story a little bit more. I'm going to give you two narratives. Here's the first one. Aaron is the high priest of the Israelites, who number about 600,000. He is a big deal. His brother, Moses, is a really big deal. So his kids grow up privileged. Maybe Nadav and Abihu grew up thinking that they were the hottest thing around town. Their dad was the high priest. Their uncle was Moses. Really the first, single name celebrity, right? Before Elvis and Cher. And maybe they're brats. And they're lazy. And they're entitled. And they're like, yeah, we know. We're supposed to be priests. It's fine. Like, so I left out the oregano. Like, whatever. God doesn't care. Like, who cares? We'll just do it. It's fine. And then what happens? Right? They explode. And that's because they were terrible people and they were behaving inappropriately. That could be there. That's a totally valid interpretation of the text. There's nothing to contradict that necessarily. Here's narrative number 2. Aaron is the high priest of the Israelites, which number about 600,000. His brother is Moses, who is super famous. He's like the Beyonce of the Israelites. But they raise their kids, Aaron and Moses as uncle. They raise those kids to be respectful, to have a sense of vision, of purpose, and responsibility. And the reason that they brought what the Torah calls Eish Zara, alien fire before God, was that they were trying to speak their faith and their truth as best they could. Maybe they were trying to be innovative for the purpose of reaching God, of drawing closer in worship, of finding a new way to speak and communicate with the Divine One, to serve their role as priests the best way they knew how. So, yet, it wasn't what they were supposed to do, and something went wrong. But they meant well. Also possible. They could be sincere. The rest of the story after they're killed is my favorite part of the Bible, because it is the most honest conveyance, image of a family, of broken familyness that we have in the Torah. And there's a lot of messed up family relations in the Torah. But Moses, after the boys are killed, says, "This is what God meant when God said, 'Through those close to me, I draw holy.' Now, this is, let's say, nonsense. It's a little pompous, too. This quote is made up because Moses says he's quoting God, but it's not anywhere in the Torah. So he has some high-minded, pompous answer to tell the father who just lost 2 sons. And it says in the Torah, Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent. He was speechless. He was speechless at the utter callousness of Moses' response. No words of comfort. Nothing nice to say. Just sanctimonious awfulness from your brother after you just lost 2 kids. Some of the greatest tragedy you can imagine. It absolutely astonishes me how accurate this moment is in Hebrew. Vayidom Aharon, and he's silent. That's it. And then Moses goes on to command a little cleanup crew, and then God continues on with all the commandments. Never a word about what happened. Now, I always read this in the plain meaning of the text. Moses was a little sanctimonious at times in the Torah, and Aaron was speechless. But maybe Moses was really stuck between his role as brother and his role as leader of 600,000 whiny Israelites. It's hard, right? Maybe he was trying to figure out, how do you represent God's law, which, if nothing else, Moses takes really literally. And what does he say? He's like, I feel bad, but literally I told them exactly what to do. Literally I said, this is how you do it. Don't do it differently or God will kill you. And then they went ahead and did it differently anyways. So on the one hand, he's saying, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's really clear around here what the laws are and what the consequences are. They blew it. Moses had a stutter. He was heavy of tongue, it said. He had trouble speaking. Maybe he didn't know what to say. How many times have we been confronted with someone else's loss, a friend or a family member, and you really want to comfort them? And then you say things like, don't worry, it'll get better. And you're like, ugh, it's the wrong thing to say. We do it all the time. We mean well, but we just misspeak. Maybe Moses just misspoke and had the bad good luck to have it written down in the Torah and read for 3,000 straight years. God knows if some of the things I said on accident were written down and read every week for 3,000 years, I would be a little embarrassed. How do we decide on the narratives that go on in our head? Right? How do we recognize when we're telling a story about another person, filling in the details that we don't have? Like that guy in the truck behind me on Wynwood Road. I had a story. I wrote it in about half a second. I knew the whole thing. I knew he was mean, and he didn't tip well, and he drove too fast, and he yelled at people for no reason. But that's totally made up. It was just in my head. So I had the opportunity, which I sincerely tried to do, to rewrite that story. I think this story of Nadav and Avihu is powerful because of the holes. Much of the Torah is powerful because of the gaps in the text. Because of the opportunity we have to say, okay, what really happened? How can we read this differently? And by taking our sacred text and saying, there's more than one way to guess what happened. There's more than one way to read into the text, to read into the stories, to understand who these people were. We can do that with each other. We live in a world where it's really easy and, frankly, quite encouraged to tell stories about other people, to assume that you know what other people are thinking and what their reasoning is. Those who are across from us in the political divide of the United States in 2019 right now, it is very easy to say, I know what they're thinking. I know what those people are like. But we don't. And if we could maybe figure out how to read that story, how to tell that narrative in more than one way. Not to say that it has to be the other way. Not to say that everyone has to be a good person. There are going to be some people around here who are not that nice. But how do we take those narratives and say, it's possible there's more than one story to tell here. It's possible that there's more than one way to imagine what someone with whom I utterly disagree with comes to that idea, comes to that place, and comes to that opinion. And even more importantly, how do we take that ability to rewrite a narrative and rewrite our own? How do we come to a place where we can take our own shame and our own guilt, our own regrets, and our challenges and tell a new story about them? So in the week to come, my challenge to you is this. Try to listen for those stories in your head. The ones we tell about ourselves, the ones we tell about others. Try to observe them. And when you see yourself telling a story and you know it couldn't be the only possibility, try to tell another story. Try to find another angle and another perspective. And I think that if all of us try this, we can move just a little bit closer to Olam Haba, to the time when hopefully we'll all be at peace and we won't need to tell new stories anymore. Shabbat Shalom.